Welcome to Weekend Ag Matters from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Join us for an in-depth look at Iowa agriculture. Here's your host, Riley Smith.
The temperatures are much cooler this weekend after the warm and active weather we've seen this past week. Welcome to this week's edition of Weekend Ag Matters. I'm Riley Smith. Russ Parker, Dustin Hoffmann, and Mark Magnuson will join us later on in the show. As for right now, let's start with a quick look at the news headlines. The search for Iowa's best breaded pork tenderloin has started. The Iowa Pork Producers Association kicked off the 2026 Iowa's Best Breaded Pork Tenderloin Contest, and nominations are officially open until June 1st. The annual tradition shines a spotlight on the restaurant serving up one of Iowa's most iconic sandwiches, and Iowa Pork is calling on both tenderloin fans and restaurants to get in the game. Each person can submit one nomination, and if your pick rises to the top, you'll be entered for a chance to win $100. Restaurants must serve hand-breaded pork tenderloin sandwiches as a regular menu item and be open to the public year-round to qualify. After nominations close, Iowa Pork will select the top 40 restaurants across Iowa, including the top 5 from each of its 8 districts. From there, undercover judges will visit each location and evaluate entries based on pork quality, flavor, appearance, and overall experience. The top 5 will be unveiled in October during National Pork Month, with the winner earning $500, a plaque, and statewide recognition. The runner-up will receive $250 and a plaque. You can nominate restaurants at iowapork.org. In other news, Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Nag and the Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council, or NREC, announced a new 3-year nitrogen soil sampling project that will conduct nitrogen soil testing for farmers in targeted areas upstream from the Des Moines Metro. Testing for residual nitrogen in the soil can help farmers dial in their fertilizer application rates, which may help cut input costs while delivering meaningful water quality benefits. The first phase of the project begins this spring. NREC is currently enrolling farmers directly north of the Des Moines Metro in Boone, Calhoun, Greene, Hamilton, and Webster counties. The program will expand this fall to include more fields in the Boone, Des Moines, Middle Cedar, and Raccoon River watersheds. Farmers can start enrolling now at iowanrec.org. And that's all the time we have for news headlines this week. Check out the rest of our daily news stories at iowaagnet.com, and while you're there, sign up for our daily e-newsletter to get those ag stories conveniently delivered to your inbox every day. We'll go ahead and kick it over to Russ Parker with his faith-based food for thought here on Weekend Ag Matters.
I've talked about being in the dark before, but today maybe from a little different perspective. A few years ago, I helped a hunter track a wounded deer during the bow season. The hunter had waited a few hours and asked if I'd help because a deer had crossed into my property. And so after dark, under a moonless, cloudy sky, we headed into the woods with flashlights, following a blood trail. And you guessed it, in no time, we had lost our sense of direction. And we were in unfamiliar territory with no cell service, no yard lights to be seen, no road noise, nothing. We stopped, we tried to reset, tried to get our bearings, but the direction back to where we started, completely undiscernible. And it was a warm night, so we weren't in any danger from the elements, but we were, without question, lost. And then, by what felt like a small miracle, suddenly we stepped out into an open field and recognized exactly where we were. Have you ever been lost like that, maybe driving without a map or wandering through a maze, or standing in a place where nothing looks familiar? I read the other day that we spend nearly half of our waking hours mentally wandering. Now, I don't know if that number's right, but this I do know. There are times when I miss a turn driving, walk into a room and forget why I'm there or what I came to get, or lose my train of thought entirely. Being lost physically usually means that there's been a disconnect between what we see and how we process it. But what about being lost spiritually? Sometimes that happens quietly. We slip into autopilot and we drift and we don't even realize that we're wandering off course. For me, worry is usually the signal. When I start worrying, I have learned that that's my wake-up call, that I've gotten disconnected. And I'm reminded of what it says in the book of Isaiah in chapter 41. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God, and I will strengthen you, and I will help you, and I will uphold you. So being lost isn't the end of the story, but knowing we are lost is the beginning, and realizing we need to reconnect. Because unlike that dark night in the woods, we can be certain we are really never without direction. We just have to turn back to the one who knows exactly where we are, and he will lead us home. Food for thought, I hope. This is Russ Parker. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, Russ, and that's it for segment 1 on this week's episode. Coming up after this short break, Dustin visits with U.S. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins. You're listening to Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Your local radio station brings you the local news you depend on. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network complements that with ag news, weather, and market updates tailored for Iowa's farmers. Together, we deliver the best of both worlds, local connection and industry expertise. It's all to keep you connected with the heartbeat of the heartland, the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, connecting rural Iowa with the news that matters to you.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here's your host, Dustin Hoffmann.
We're on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I have the privilege right now to be joined by U.S. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins on the phone. Secretary, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us.
Dustin, it's always an honor to be on with you and all of my amazing friends in the Midwest. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So as we're talking today, we're coming to the end of tax day, April 15th, and of course everybody's got that marked on their calendar in one way, shape, or form, but we're kind of talking today about some of the tax relief and the tax cuts that came with H.R. 1, especially a good time to really highlight those. And farmers were really concerned about some of those things. Secretary, you want to kind of highlight where we're at now as we're getting to this first tax day under that new bill?
Well, yes, and I really appreciate, you don't often have a celebration on tax day, and certainly there is, still so much work to do. People still pay way too much in taxes. The government is way too big. We need the government off the back of everybody. But it's a big day. I mean, that bill itself was the largest tax cut in American history. The average savings for the average family of four in America is between $3,000 and I think $5,000, all the way up to $10,000 and $12,000, depending on where you are. And that's just the average American. For all of our farmers, really, and I know that's kind of where you focus, and being on your agribusiness radio network is really great. It's an honor. But for our farmers especially, that bill represented the largest investment in rural America in history. And it was everything from exempting permanently about 2 million families from the death tax. I had a lot of feedback on that as I was traveling the country in my first year, how important that was. It made permanent 100% expensing. It made permanent and doubling small business expensing, which of course all of our farmers for the most part are usually qualified for small business, deferring capital gains on farmland sales, driving into rural America $100 billion in investments in opportunity zones, which will be very helpful. Of course, the healthcare transformation fund into rural America, the Trump accounts. I mean, it's just kind of one thing after another. So we're really working to celebrate today on what was an unprecedented and historic effort, but especially for our rural communities.
You know, when you talk about death tax and capital gains tax, and when we think of big businesses where you have billionaires involved, obviously there is some, money that has to be paid. But when you talk about farmers, they're asset rich. I mean, the land has got value, but these taxes could be an impediment on passing on the family farm, couldn't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And none of this is perfect. This work is difficult and it is hard, and I feel like we're running uphill all day, every day, probably similar to how our farmers feel, right? Based on input costs and no new trade deals for so long and all the struggles out in farm country. So I certainly can attest to that and fighting to try to change all of that. But every little bit helps and every step forward helps. And when I got to USDA about 14 months ago, this U.S. Department of Agriculture under the former administration was really focused more on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, focused on granting crazy, radical agenda, liberal research like the queer and BIPOC farmers of San Francisco. That was actually a grant that was funded by taxpayer money through USDA. There are many, many others like that. focused on the climate change things that the president obviously has been very against and has been really good about. So I think that even though times are tough, and certainly right now with fertilizer prices, et cetera, with the conflict overseas, what we're doing to build the long-term infrastructure to change that trajectory with reference prices increasing finally for the first time in over 10 years, will start in October. The tax cuts, I had a big meeting today with fertilizer companies from around the world, reshoring our fertilizer industry, working to bring the input costs down, opening up more trade deals. You know, this is a big deal for Iowa. We are expecting the export of corn to increase more than 20% this year, and ethanol, of course, all tied together, but to increase more than 25% this year, while at the same time bringing labor costs down. Fuel will come back down, et cetera. So we're making progress, even though it's certainly a difficult time.
And of course, also there's provisions in the legislation, obviously, that help rural America as far as the small towns. It's a symbiotic relationship, as farmers know. Farmers need the resources that the small towns provide, but also those small towns depend on farmers to be the big economic driver for them.
That's 100% right, and that's why the Rural Health Transformation Fund is so important. $50 billion to rebuild our hospitals in rural America in this bill. The $100 billion opportunity zones. The idea of an opportunity zone is you go into a blighted area and you make a very, attractive incentive to bring investment into those blighted areas. That opportunity zone was passed in the first Trump term, has brought in so much prosperity, but more to the urban areas. But in the One Big Beautiful Bill, we actually put rural areas back at the top of that list. That's going to be huge as you bring in new money and new investment into some of these small towns. I grew up in a tiny town of 1,200 on the plains of Texas. I know you're from a small town, Dustin, in Minnesota. Like this is the heartbeat of America. And this president is hyper-focused, I might argue, more than any president since Abraham Lincoln founded the Department of Agriculture in 1862, on the importance of our small towns, of rural America, and of our farmers and ranchers.
And of course, as we're getting ready to plant, and we're a month past crop insurance deadline, but crop insurance obviously was a big part of that as far as reference prices and premiums and all of that. And that was a big win for farmers because that stuff, especially the reference prices, hadn't been updated in quite some time.
More than a decade, no new farm bill in the last administration. Was the first thing I heard when I got named to this position. Brooke, we've got to get a farm bill. The more I looked into it, the more I realized that the typical farm bill is held hostage by the Democrats, by the left, because the food stamp, the SNAP program is in there. So that's why Farm Bill hadn't passed. Farm Bill itself is only 15% about the farmers, 85% about welfare programs. So instead, thanks to President Trump and the Republicans on the Hill, we put the vast majority of what we needed in the Farm Bill, the reference prices being at the very top of the list, into that tax cut bill, the reconciliation bill, which didn't require 60 votes from the Senate, but required 51. And that's what has made all the difference. And to your point, why that's so important, just the increase in the reference prices alone this fall will put another $16 billion into the pockets of our farmers that rely on those reference prices. It's a significant increase, 10 to 20% for most of our row croppers especially. So that's good news on the horizon as well.
And as we get ready to wrap up here today, Secretary, obviously, you said there's never a perfect bill, and there's always some things that need to be worked on, but also the fact that we are still waiting on a farm bill. I mean, some of those things have obviously been addressed in the H.R. 1, but how important is it for you to help kind of just drive Congress and get that message to them that this needs to get done? We've waited long enough. I mean, it's out of your hands, obviously, but how much pressure can you help put on that?
Well, it is an excellent question, and I hope I can be very helpful. Maybe the most helpful I can be is continuing to advise President Trump what a priority it has to be. I mean, he's already Truth Social. He is on record saying, let's get a farm bill passed. And that's really encouraging to me to see him leaning in such a significant way. I don't think the Oval Office has ever had so many discussions about soybeans, E15, blueberries, seafood, screwworm. I mean, these ag issues are very front and center for him all day, every day. And I tell you, the year-round E15 is probably the very top of the list, at least on my priority list and what needs to happen on the Hill. That's going to be a game changer. We're making so much progress internationally with 18 new trade deals in 1 year, opening up these markets in new ways. But we also need to open up the domestic market here in America, and nothing will do that more than E15. So I'm going to keep pushing as hard as I possibly can. I know the president is all in, our administration is all in, and I think the future is very bright.
Well, Secretary, I know you've got a very busy schedule, but we really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us and give us this update today.
Oh, wonderful, Dustin. Anytime. Can't wait to be back on with you. And I've already been to Iowa 3, maybe 4 times. So we'll likely be back in your backyard very soon.
Well, I know you got to at least throw down the challenge one more time with the steer show with the governor, don't you?
Exactly. I still can't believe I didn't win that thing. I got to come back and give it another shot. That's 100% right.
All right. Well, Secretary, thank you so much. That again was U.S. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins here on Weekend Ag Matters. We're going to take a short break, and Mark Magnuson will be in to wrap up the show next.
Hi, my name is Ethan Smith, and I've been a certified crop advisor in Iowa for about 6 years. The Iowa CCA program is valuable to me because it helps keep me informed on new topics and research around the industry, including soils, insects, diseases, and much more. It's also a great way to network with others around the state and beyond. Iowa is known for its crops, and that's why we're here. To learn more about becoming a certified crop advisor, visit iowacca.org.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here is Mark Magnuson.
Mark Magnuson for the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm joined today by Jose De Jesus, the National Pork Board's Vice President of Market Growth. And today we're going to learn more about the Mexican-American consumer and a new campaign from the National Pork Board, which is called Explora Todo el Gusto del Pork. It's a nationwide consumer brand campaign designed to drive long-term demand by engaging Hispanic, Gen Z, and millennial consumers. And Jose, could you first of all tell us, please, about this campaign? Because we know right now, as you walk through the grocery store, protein is a major focus. We've seen those changes in the dietary guidelines. We have seen, protein become part of high protein diets. And so right now it's really top of mind for people. Could you tell us, please, about this new campaign and consumers' preferences towards protein and specifically pork?
Yeah, you bet, Mark. Thanks for having me. So, consumers are, first of all, protein is having a moment. That's a fact. And pork it's in the middle of that. So consumers are looking for flavor, convenience, balance, versatility, and pork delivers in all of those. I like to think about this as, pork is a protein that has it all. And so when you think about the younger consumer, which is a part of this campaign rollout in the Hispanic market, they're looking for cultural foods, and no other protein is more cultural and authentic than pork. You think about Asian cuisine or Hispanic cuisine, whether it's al pastor, carnitas, it's pork is right in the middle of that. So it is having a moment. It's driven, a lot of it driven by flavor, but also what the consumer preference. They're looking for balance. They're looking for convenience in terms of, what I need right now is a quick meal that would satisfy my cravings, but also something that I can put together that's versatile enough to be able to make it at home. Consumers don't have a lot of time when you think about it to prepare this elaborate dishes. So it has to be something that tastes good, that's quick, that can feed their families. And I think pork is positioned to deliver on that.
And something, Jose, that I didn't really realize until I read some of the research from National Pork Board, talked with some of the board members and people that work for the National Pork Board, is just the fact that younger people maybe in the past had been a little bit intimidated about cooking with pork. And it wasn't necessarily anything that was, their fault. They just didn't realize that, like you said, there are so many things that pork can help to complement on the plate. Has that been found in your research, and I guess just in meeting with people, that was maybe kind of a misconception of the past?
Well, there's always been misconception. I think part of it is, people still struggle how to cook the product, right? And so we always recommend that 145 with a 3-minute rest for those whole muscle cuts. But I think people, when you think about in this specific case that we're really targeting the Hispanic consumer, you know, the campaign, it's Explora todo el gusto del pork, which is all about exploration, right? Our challenge is not necessarily to get Hispanics to try the product. They already love the product, right? We already index in consumption. It's very relevant in the community, but really it's about how you go deeper into the portfolio, right? So giving them ideas and all the things that you can do with the product, whether it's using an air fryer to cook something that's quick and tasty, whether it's taking one of those very authentic recipes from your grandma or your grandpa. How do you take that and recreate that without losing the essence and the tradition and cook it really quickly, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here is, still anchor a lot of the ideas in culture, but then how do we give consumers an idea how to prepare that dish in a very quick way that they still can enjoy kind of the basis of that dish, but in a much faster way. So that's a big part of our strategy as we roll this out.
And then could you give us some more details of the campaign? I know you already touched a little bit on the name and why that was chosen for this campaign, but could you give us some more details about what exactly we should be expecting from this campaign?
Yeah, so I want to ground you a little bit on the strategy. So, and then I'll get to some of those things. But when you think about this tagline, there's a key word in the tagline, that's gusto. And gusto, it speaks to many different things, but particularly around taste and flavor, around enjoyment, around passion, pleasure, all those kind of things. So when you're trying to build a brand and be relevant to consumers, you have to build that emotional connection. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. We know Hispanics are very loyal. So if we can build an emotional connection with that consumer, we can earn their best. And so that is very trying to do here. It's how do we build that loyalty? And I think the word gusto is so critical because it goes higher than taste and flavor, right? It speaks to that, but it's more emotional rather than functional, right? And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do here. In terms of the campaign, it's younger consumers are in the digital space. The Gen Z and the millennial, they spend a lot of time in social media, digital channels. So a lot of the work that we're doing is in that space, but also working with our retail partners. How do we drive consumers to retail so they can purchase a product? And because we know they're spending a lot of time in the digital space, it makes sense to be playing in that environment. So we're really excited about this. I think, pork is king in the Hispanic community. How do we get them to explore farther and go deeper into the category or the portfolio, I should say? I think it's important to us so we can continue to drive consumption and ultimately demand for our product.
Jose, how does this campaign work alongside the overall campaign of Taste What Pork Can Do, which of course we have seen fully rolled out and been talking about now for a decent amount of time?
Yeah, so it actually is aligned very well. One of the things that we heard as we were going through this process is make sure that we're not duplicating effort, make sure that it's all anchored in one single strategy, right? So the Taste What Pork Can Do campaign is anchored obviously around taste. And so this campaign in the Hispanic world is also anchored around taste. Now, you do have to put some cultural lens around that because you can't really take what you're doing with Taste What Pork Can Do and translate it. It's not going to connect from a cultural perspective, right? So we anchor the campaign around three cultural, what I would call cultural lens, if you will, pillars. And one is around this idea of comfort in culture. Consumers are looking for that taste of home, and that's very important for consumers because, or for Hispanic consumers, because a lot of the dishes that they recreate and they put home, they're like legendary, right? They are created by grandma, abuela, abuelo, and so it's a big deal, right? To anchor ourselves into that taste of home. Number two, it's really about this idea of seeking tradition. We know pork, it's a staple in the community, but it's often relegated to what I would call special occasions. And we believe that pork can be enjoyed every day at any time, any day part of the day, right? So thinking about breakfast, lunch, and dinner, snacking, anything in between. And so how do we take this from moving from being an occasional or special moment type of protein to everyday consumption. So that's a big part of that. And then the third pillar is what we call the gusto multitasker, right? And I kind of spoke a little bit about that, but this is about not just hitting taste and flavor. That's a given. I mean, taste or pork is
Jose,
delicious.
thanks so much for the
has an
time here
amazing
today.
taste.
Really
It's our
appreciate it,
number
and
one
have a
attribute.
great rest of your
But
week.
then how do we connect the dots? How do we
Thank
build
you
that
to Jose
emotional
De
connection with the
Jesus of
consumer?
the National
And so
Pork Board for joining
the
today's
idea
episode of
gusto
Weekend Ag
multitasker
Matters.
speaks to taste,
So that's going to bring us to the end
enjoyment, to
of the
pleasure,
show.
to
You can
passion,
find
all
this
the things
episode
that
and
we
all
wanna
of our
do so we
past
can build
episodes
that
of Weekend Ag Matters under the podcast tab on our website at iowaagnet.com. For Russ Parker, Dustin Hoffmann, and Riley Smith, I'm Mark Magnuson. You've been listening to Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.